welcome back. You're listening to A Path to Wellness on rhinoonair.com, WSPF-DB.com. And I'm Dr. Christopher Jackson, PhD, DOM, Florida. And let's hope that we're all enriched with joy and happiness and self-fulfillment and centeredness and peace. Yeah. So
We're going to talk about marijuana today?
yes, I'm going to talk about pot. I'm going to talk about recent legislation that passed in the state of Florida, which has been happening all over the country, the United States, that is. And in Florida, a law just passed for the medical use of marijuana, legalizing medical marijuana for individuals with specific debilitating diseases or comparable debilitating conditions as determined by a licensed state physician. Okay. Now, that does include me in the sense that I am a licensed state physician. However, the law is specifying in the actual writing of it specific types of doctors that currently excludes the kind I am. However, we are working on changing that because, as you can see, that's a broad category and I am within that category. So I should be able to help people with this. Now, I'll leave that alone for now because there's maybe
what kind of doctors are going to be?
Specifically, right now it's written for MDs and DOs. And yes, there are other kinds of physicians. They are not exclusive to MDs and DOs. And the law, the initial vote for that states that it be by a licensed state physician. But I'm not intending to get really political about this right now. So I can certainly pursue that. I may pursue it a little bit later in the show if we have some time.
Yeah, we've had enough of that these days, haven't we?
I've enough politics for a while, yeah, for sure. So I wanted to give you some perspective on this from my point of view. Let me just start by getting away from the medical aspect for a minute, but not political specifically. We have in our country, in the United States, we imprison people for nonviolent offenses, often longer than they would be in prison for violent offenses. So I have to ask, does that make any sense, first of all? So when somebody goes to jail for a nonviolent drug offense, they're in jail. Quite often what happens is something else comes up during that stay, and that stay gets extended. If there is anything that, I mean, they're all at that point, their life is altered. There are certain rules and regulations about what they can do, what they cannot do. Their lives are restricted once they complete their sentence. And, I don't think that in general our laws are intended to mess up families, to mess up lives through the use of one choice of drug versus the other. I don't think that's reasonable. However, I do think that there are powers in place that benefit from the laws being the way they are, just like they are with pharmaceuticals, for example, and other types of drugs. So, there are benefits to marijuana as opposed to other drugs that may be used. And for example, we have obviously legal alcohol use. At a certain age, we do have a lot of people who are addicted, and there are various kinds of addictions, alcohol addictions. We have the same for cigarette use, right? Tobacco. It does alter the mind. Smoking a cigarette alters your body, alters your mind. And it is an addictive process that goes on, just like with alcohol. The difference is with smoking, it's not affecting it to the level that you lose your judgment and this kind of thing. However, it can certainly affect your temperament. There's a word for you. It's been used a lot lately. So that's something to consider. And one of the applications that is at least reported or purported to exist for marijuana is actually treatment of alcohol and tobacco addiction. Isn't that interesting?
Say that again.
One of the possibilities for the use of marijuana is to treat people who are addicted to
phenomenal.
tobacco or alcohol.
That's
That's
phenomenal.
right.
That's phenomenal.
There are many applications for marijuana. You know that the country of Spain has been researching the use of cannabis for well over a decade. I mean, in their universities. And use of cannabis specifically for treatment of cancer. It has shown tremendous results in the treatment of cancer. So there are just a huge number of applications of this. So I'm going to discuss some of those applications or some of those things that can be treated with marijuana. Let me see. I have a list I'm pulling up here, and hopefully I haven't stored it away in the wrong place. Here we go. Okay. So a lot of people are already aware of the use of pot for treatment of glaucoma. But that is one of the applications of it. And it's a widely touted application that the pressure buildup that exists in the disorder of glaucoma is actually helped by ingesting cannabis. So we're not necessarily talking about smoking it, right? And there may be problems associated with smoking as well, but there are also evidently some benefits from studies on these things. So with glaucoma, ingesting it helps to reduce the pressure in the eye that's caused by glaucoma. And that helps for a while, so it needs to be a use that is repeated to maintain that effect. Again, that's a widely known, been used for years and years for that purpose. Certainly in the states that have legalized medical marijuana, it's commonly used for that purpose. I mentioned cancer. Many types of cancer can be treated using marijuana. So why haven't we been using it for that purpose? I'll just put that out there because obviously there are folks who are invested in the conventional approach with chemo and radiation and the costs of those chemicals and the money that's made through the use of those chemicals. All right, so I said I'm not going to get political, so I'll leave it at that. So here's one you may not have realized. Might be able to take a few pounds off. There are studies showing that people who use cannabis do more easily lose weight or maintain a healthy weight because of its effect on the regulation of the production of insulin. So that means that blood sugar regulation is more efficiently managed through the use of cannabis. Related to that, so you can actually help your waistline, but related, well, okay, now I don't know if they're incorporating into that the fact that a lot of people who smoke pot end up with what's called the munchies, right? So they're more likely to consume some junk food or something along those lines. But all in all, the insulin management and therefore the glucose management is improved through the use of pot. And because of that, it can also be helpful in management or improvement of diabetes. So we have a couple of blood sugar management related improvements that can be made. Now, there are other kinds of disorders that are problematic in our society, and as we continue to frankly ignore some of the research that's out there that shows that things like your flu shot, which has the marisol, which has mercury in it, may be affecting children who are injected mentally and leading to disorders such as autism or autism spectrum disorders. There is quite a bit of research backing that up, folks, and it's been out there for years. And yet the argument is still out there that that is not the case. Well, putting that aside, an autistic child, some autistic children, some autistic adults even, may occasionally have fits of rage, anger, basically lashing out. This is one of the characteristics that we see with autism. And the use of pot, I'm not saying that this is a wonderful thing for children or anything like that, but the use of pot for this particular issue can help to calm those events, help to relax the child or relax the adult, and therefore minimize the frequency, if not eliminate, these kinds of events. See, pot tends to produce more of an apathetic and relaxed state. Now, the apathy certainly is not a wonderful thing when it comes to if somebody needs to be productive, right? So it needs to be during a time when they're not responsible for management of something or this kind of thing. And this is one of the issues that comes up with employers. Even if pot is legal, your employer is not obligated to keep you on the job if you've been using it while you're working, or even if you used it before you got to work. Your employer is still able to send you home or fire you, even if the use of pot is legal. Just like if you had, started your day out with a 6-pack of beer and drove all over the road to get to your job, and you see the point. Your employer is not going to accept that. And I think rightly so. So we have to use some judgment here as far as timing. Obviously you don't want to be doing it and then driving, just like with alcohol. Now, there's a difference in the way that it's affecting your mind, but it is mind altering. And there are addictive properties to marijuana. So, that is a trade-off there when we talk about treating addictions like alcohol and tobacco addictions. So it needs to be managed with some judgment and carefully. Related somewhat to ASD, in terms of the fact that we see different sorts of behaviors, not really directly related, but ADHD or ADD. ADHD, we see the fidgetiness, right? We see the, climbing all over furniture, just constant activity, this kind of thing. That can be managed as well because of the calming effects of pot. Now, for some, pot will actually create more anxiety and even paranoia. So we have to understand that this may not work for everybody. So we still need alternate solutions for these things. But I'd love to give you an example right now of a situation where I take issue sometimes with the diagnoses that are made, because they're often made based on, yes, behavioral characteristics. However, there can be underlying physiological reasons for those things. And this is actually one of my pet areas and the subject of a PhD that I'm currently working on in behavioral medicine. And so we have situations where it can look like something, but it's really something else. And ADHD is one of those. I had a young child, a 3-year-old, whose parents brought him into the office years ago. And, they didn't want to put him on Ritalin or any of the other drugs that are commonly used for this. And, I inquired into lots of things. I listened carefully and asked about all the different things I ask about as far as, how his body was working, metabolism, bowel movements, all these things. And discovered he made a little statement about spiders. And I think he said he had spiders in the toilet or something like that. So that gave me a little clue because I was listening. It gave me a clue. And what I did was I did a stool sample. And I investigated 3 parasites. He had 2 of the 3. I took care of it naturally, using natural remedies or natural medicine for the parasites to get rid of them. And he was a different child altogether. I mean, his behavior improved 100%. So there are times, and quite often, that the diagnosis might fit the behavior, but it's not the right diagnosis. So we need to be careful about these things and listen very, very well. And this is part of the problem with the current conventional approach is that, I mean, it's the approach, but it's also the fact that we're looking at a large population who needs attention, and it's a very fairly efficient approach to treatment. It may not be the best form of treatment, but it is an efficient approach where a physician or a PA can spend 2 minutes with a patient and get to treatment and be done. So they can see more people. So there are pros to that. There are definite benefits to that fact that that's the way the system works. However, one of the deficits there is that the listening is quite often not as thorough. The questions are not as thorough. When you see a physician, if you're lucky enough to see a physician, you may see a PA or an ARNP. But in either case, quite often the time is very limited and there's not enough time to really get all the data, get all the facts. That is not the fault of the practitioner. It's really about the system and about serving more people. However, for those who pursue other approaches, there's a practice like mine where I see people and I give them much more time. I ask a lot of questions and I get into some significant depth in each situation to understand thoroughly what all of the factors are that are involved and how we can approach the situation. And this is one example. So putting that into the whole situation, there are other approaches, regardless of whether I in the future am involved in the prescribing of marijuana in a medical form or not. I'm always going to be using many approaches to treatment, and I have many tools to pull from. It's just going to be one more tool as far as I'm concerned. So it really makes no huge difference to me. However, it may be, in some cases, the best option. So it's certainly worth considering as that. Other types of disorders that can be treated. Neurological disorders, calming the nerves. How about things like multiple sclerosis? That's shown some benefit with treatment using marijuana. Seizures, to help to regulate seizures or to certainly calm them. So maybe reducing the frequency, the intensity, this kind of thing. One that kind of surprised me in doing some research was that it can actually be helpful in terms of musculoskeletal issues. Anything from broken bones and dysfunctional joints to worn joints, rebuilding cartilage, helping to contribute to collagen production.
Wow.
So that kind of caught me off guard. I was surprised by that. So we have quite a range of things that can be treated with the assistance of medical marijuana. And another one that surprised me when I first ran across this years ago in discussion with a patient who was self-medicating with marijuana. She had an issue with asthma, and found that, and it was interesting to me because that's really one thing that started to open my mind to the idea of actually going the direction of treating with medical marijuana. At the time, I really was opposed to the idea, but it started to work on me a little bit. And this was a situation where her lungs would get very inflamed. And the anti-inflammatory aspects of marijuana were what she was taking advantage of, even though she was smoking it. She was smoking it, and she had a lung disorder. Yet it was improving that disorder. That shocked me. Honestly shocked me, you know. And that is the aspect that we're talking about when we're getting into, for example, treating cancer. That's one of the aspects of medical marijuana that is helpful, is that it's anti-inflammatory. Now, we have a large range of anti-inflammatories. It is not the only solution by far. And I'm talking in natural medicine, okay? Let alone, I don't know if we want to consider them solutions, but things like chemo and radiation and this kind of thing, or NSAIDs, which, you know, again, basically the majority of what is done conventionally is to treat the symptoms. And my focus is more on treating the underlying cause. So going a totally different direction from this, but still kind of, I don't know, close to some of the other neurological and things like that, is Alzheimer's. There has been some positive benefit shown with medical marijuana in the treatment of Alzheimer's. So studies are showing that cannabis itself can actually delay the onset or potentially even stop the progression entirely of Alzheimer's. And that's a pretty amazing thing. Now, again, there are many other solutions, and I am talking about not just the drugs like Aricept and so on, but there are many other solutions within the realm of natural medicine in terms of treatment with underlying nutrients that go into the production of the neurotransmitters that assist with memory and cognition. That's just one aspect of natural treatment for Alzheimer's. And I've written on this, I have articles on this. In Tampa Bay Wellness Magazine, for example. I have articles on treatment of Alzheimer's, dementia, and aging in general. I mean, I see aging as kind of a disease. It's just an unresolved disease at this point. And we're learning more and more every day about aging. From telomere activity to, you know, the twists of the DNA and the tightness of fit to the debris that's in your cells. All of these things contribute to aging. And we can certainly improve upon those activities or those situations. So it's one more tool that we can add to help with the onset of Alzheimer's and help to delay that, according to the studies. And that's significant to be able to say that. There are other aspects, like, for example, again, it is anti-inflammatory. So given its anti-inflammatory nature, if you think about inflammatory disorders, I was mentioning bones and joints, right? Well, how about arthritis, right? Arthritis is a somewhat degenerative joint disorder. And again, that can be improved, according to the studies, with the use of medical marijuana. Okay, now the medical marijuana in this form is probably not going to be, smoked. It's probably going to be in terms of putting something on topically that then is absorbed in through the skin and into the joint. However, even if it is smoked, that effect does work its way in. And I've often sort of toyed with the idea, I haven't really discussed it with anyone who knows a lot about marijuana, but it occurs to me that maybe we should, if we're going to do this kind of thing and actually dispense it as a smoked product, have filtered cigarettes, filtered cannabis joints, to use the colloquial term. So if we filtered them, then there may be some carcinogens actually that are in that smoke. I don't know. That's something I haven't investigated. But it would be kind of interesting if the same smoke that had the anti-inflammatory effect that helped to treat cancer could also include carcinogens. So that's something that needs to be investigated, at least by myself, because I don't know the answer. But I don't know if that research has been done to really look at those things. I assume it has, especially in Spain. They're leaps and bounds ahead of anyone else in the Western world. So that's something to look at. Now, we've talked about anxiety disorders. We've talked about blood sugar regulation, eating. That can be an anxiety disorder as well. Eating disorders can be related to anxiety. How about OCD? How about, seasonal affective disorder, maybe even, but certainly OCD, if somebody is anxious when they get in a crowd. What about phobias, like agoraphobia, etc. So these kinds of situations that are rooted in anxiety, we talked about post-election stress disorder last week. How about post-traumatic stress disorder? This is one of the areas that may be an application for the use of cannabis. So perhaps there may be groups specific to the use of this, like, for example, police forces, where there's been a lot of trauma and an incident that they're dealing with. How about just de-escalation? How about de-escalation? Now, there's a thought. Okay, so de-escalation is becoming a big topic nowadays. In fact, the Bounce network online, I believe, Bounce Network is promoting the idea of mandating de-escalation training for police officers throughout the country, making it a required aspect of their training, which I think is a phenomenally good idea. I mean, it is a major part of why we are living in essentially a police state and why the country is moving that direction. Because there's not enough training in de-escalation. What do I mean by de-escalation? Well, being in a situation where there is an intense or a tense situation taking place, where the officers may feel threatened, as well as the individual that they're confronting. But I've seen so many examples, we have, throughout the country within the last few years, where de-escalation training could be very, very helpful. I've got to mention one of the examples because it's sticking in my mind. One example was an incident where there was this young guy who was schizophrenic. His mother called because he was getting out of hand. So his mother calls the police and asks them specifically to send someone with training to handle this kind of situation. And it's apparent from the fact that the police reacted the way they did that the training wasn't adequate. Because this young man shows up at the door with a screwdriver in his hand. Hardly deadly force from a screwdriver, right? But their response, he shows the screwdriver, they tell him to drop it, and they finally shoot him and kill him. Because he's standing there with a screwdriver in his hand. Made no sense to me that they would feel threatened by that screwdriver. Yet this is the kind of thing we're talking about. We're seeing it on a daily basis. I can understand to a certain extent the threat of a screwdriver. Yes, potentially it could be used as a weapon, but they need to understand that this young man who they've been told, or should have been told, was schizophrenic, who the mother was saying is schizophrenic, maybe didn't take his meds, shows up at the door with a screwdriver, may not understand the significance that they're perceiving of that screwdriver. They're saying, drop it. He may not even see the world from the perspective they're seeing it. He may not understand what the heck they're talking about. And their response is to shoot him. And again, we're seeing this kind of thing happening every day in this country. These folks I'm talking about the police, need to have some training in de-escalation. Every last one of them needs to have this training, and they don't. So I think that Bounce Network's effort in this area is a very, very good thing. And I'd like to really put out my support for their efforts to promote a law requiring that all police have training in de-escalation. So I'll put that up there. Okay. So maybe I am getting political. I don't know. You might classify that as political. I think of it as human.
I do too.
So we need to look out for our fellow man, even if that fellow man is a little loony and may not respond the way that most people would respond. They still need to be treated with respect. It's not white lives matter. It's not black lives matter. It's not police lives that matter. It's every life that matters.
I'm with you.
Okay. Anyway, That said, one of the potential things that marijuana might be useful for is in de-escalation. All right, so for example, there might be some legal issues with this, but what if police had some medical marijuana candy or something that helps to sedate or relax the individual, and could have the right to administer that to an individual, such as I gave you in the example, right? Somebody who might not be too rational, might need some calming or relaxing, but you know what? Maybe they should take it themselves too, because they're the ones reacting by shooting this individual. So that's a good point too. But you know, some of that de-escalation needs to happen internally in the police. They need to be reacting differently. They need to respond differently. And this isn't every police officer. Many of them, most likely most of them, would not react this way. But you know, a lot of them do. A lot of them do. And so this training needs to be universal. So there may be some merit in that kind of thing, where there can be a substance that's used to help to calm, relax people. And so what got me started on this line was PTSD, right? So we have the police force, these kinds of situations, day in, day out, right? We have EMTs, paramedics, people that are first responders in stressful situations, day in, day out. Okay. Am I suggesting that they all go out there, you know, stoned?
That was the thought I had.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not. However, as an adjunct, perhaps as a treatment for them when they're off the clock, to help to mend their body's response, maybe to help to improve their adrenal function. You know, maybe I haven't investigated at this level that I'm about to talk about, but perhaps it has some effect on their adrenal function. Perhaps it helps to reduce that fight or flight response in a way that is beneficial. So that's something worth investigating. So you have a lot of people in intense, and I'm leaving out a very big one, that's the military. You know, when they're on the front line, when they're involved in their efforts, you know, it can be pretty intense. So we have PTSD in those situations as well. And so perhaps the military, VA, the Veterans Administration, people could be, you know, tasked with not only treating PTSD, but looking at the use of medical marijuana for the treatment of military. So there are so many possibilities, but this, as you can see, it opens up many major issues as far as the way things are being handled nowadays already, and maybe inadequately in a lot of cases. So what I'm overall getting at here is we need to have an open mind and not judge this as encouraging a bunch of potheads.
Right.
You know, and I will say that yes, it's a reasonable argument that it is a gateway drug. Yes, that's a possibility. But you know, part of what makes it a gateway drug is that, in some sense, the fact that it's illegal. It's kind of interesting because the use of marijuana is in some ways encouraged by the fact that it's illegal. When that puts into it sort of a cool aspect, right? You talk, you know, when you look at the teenage population that uses marijuana, why do they do that? Well, their peers do it. Why do their peers do it? It's cool to do that. Why is it cool? Well, because it's illegal. Is one reason that it's cool, supposedly. No, I'm not saying that they're going around breaking into houses because it's illegal and that's cool. No, but it has that kind of air to it. You know, so one of the aspects of the fact that it's got this kind of hidden use in our society is that it is hidden. You know, it's interesting how that works. But when you make it legal, and I'm not talking about casual use, that's another issue. I'm talking about for medical applications, then we're opening up a world of possibilities as far as treatment goes. And so, you know, because that is the world that I'm in, as far as looking at many forms of treatments for people, that to me has a lot of benefit to it. And as you can see, and as you've been hearing, there are a lot of potential applications for medical marijuana. So, by the way, there are other types of issues, like, you know, I've been talking about anxiety, stress, blood sugar regulation, treatment of neurological disorders, relaxing those, spasms, you know, these kinds of things. But even simple things like nausea and headaches can often be improved with the use of medical marijuana. Now, these are not typically going to be the kind of thing that will be treated with medical marijuana that will fall into this category, perhaps. But in some cases, they probably will be. Like, for example, treatment of migraines. You know, the drugs that are being injected in people when they go into a hospital for a migraine are quite often carcinogenic drugs. They cause cancer. So they're used to get rid of a migraine, but can lead to cancer. So with the use of pot, we have an anti-carcinogenic potential solution that will help to fight inflammation, fight cancer, and prevent possibly cancer, and address the migraine at the same time. And this is kind of one of the things that I'm fascinated with and love about herbal medicine. You know, there are many types of natural medicine, orthomolecular medicine, nutritional medicine, homeopathic medicine, functional medicine, all of these categories, if you want to call it that. But herbal medicine specifically is so synergistic. There are so many combinations of things that you're treating at one time with herbal medicine. It's one of the aspects that I love about herbal medicine. I can treat somebody who has 5 different things going on with one herb quite often. And certainly with an herbal formula, I can cover a huge number of disorders with a formula. So I will say that generally when I treat, I'm not using just one formula because I'm trying to work it from several different angles. Like somebody might respond better to having their nutritional aspects, the functional approach, basically treating the deficiencies they may have nutritionally. So I'm getting at the root cause while I'm treating them herbally, in some ways, maybe getting somewhat at the root, but also treating the symptoms. So I'm doing a combination. And this kind of approach often gets us there much faster. And I mean, the results are amazing. They just are. Very quick. Usually people respond very quickly to the approach that I take. So this is a good thing. There are even some skin conditions that can be improved. And I mean, even when we talk about cancer, I mean, if they're doing conventional treatment, there's the nausea associated with the conventional treatments with chemo. The pot can be used as an adjunct. Medical marijuana can be used as an adjunct to help with those effects, to help improve things. Now, there are many other ways of approaching that. There are, in Chinese medicine specifically, the herbal formulas can be used quite often to help with these effects of chemo. So if somebody chooses to do the chemo, they can still do medical marijuana as an adjunct to that, or they can do other forms of herbal medicine. And isn't that interesting? Marijuana is essentially an herbal medicine, and yet the way the law has been written in Florida, it's been put into the hands of people who are used to refined drugs. Instead of basically the people who deal with herbal medicine normally, which is kind of odd.
I guess if trying to be a little optimistic, it may just put it in a more serious category for the mentality of some.
That's possible.
And what I can hope for is that by them seeing that, by this progressing and moving forward, and people seeing the effects of herbal medicine being classified as, FDA approved, etc., will just step it up for being more aware of healing and not masking.
Yeah. That's funny that you brought up the FDA approval thing, because a large portion of the medicine that I do that's natural is actually FDA regulated. The FDA has gone into these places, inspected them, oversees that process.
Which adds on the credibility, because it's not to say I've seen products that are out there that have not been FDA approved yet, or have not been FDA approved, meaning because I don't know what's the cost involved to get something FDA seen,
yeah.
And I'm sure there is money involved
Definitely,
in that.
sure.
So, and because of that, I personally don't discredit the FDA at all by far. However, it's not the only thing I take into consideration
Right.
to determine something's effective or not. However, with this whole controversy with the marijuana and cannabis, whatever it's called, I guess it kind of just does, hopefully will be a good way of making things move forward. It's scary because, it comes down to the money trail.
Oh, absolutely. It always does. Always comes down to the money, doesn't it? So anyway, I've given you a smattering of the range of possible applications of medical marijuana. It's not exhausted by any means.
Marijuana? That's what happens after we start. I'm
Start
teasing.
No, not at this point.
No, I know. I'm just teasing.
So, yeah. There's just, the list goes on. I'm looking at a huge list here of possible applications, and it just goes on and on. So,
you know what, Doc? There's a lot of companies that already manufacture products for marijuana. I had a visit to California while I was visiting my son, and I have friends that go back and forth to Colorado, and they see all these products from juice to candy to cookies to
Yeah, the
brownies.
candy does concern me a little bit.
So that would be interesting if we could also find out a little more, and maybe even bring on one of these manufacturers to see through a conversation. So you
That's
could
interesting.
see. So we
Possibly
can work
explore
on that. Yeah, and find out, who's doing what and why.
I might just have somebody all ready for that.
Yay! Because this is very interesting to me, because since I've been diagnosed with MS, and so and other things, I am definitely, want to be a guinea pig on
A
this one,
candidate
a candidate for any experimental, because it just goes along the lines of natural
Yes.
healing, and that's
Oh, there
what
are
I'm all about.
many approaches. I've been treating MS for a long time as just one of the areas that I've dealt with. And there are many approaches. Part of it is the anti-inflammatory nature that is offered by medical marijuana. But there are many types of anti-inflammatories that can be helpful for MS. And there are many other types of treatments that help MS.
Here's my issue, and again, I know we're already time's up, but it's when there's things that help MS, but with these things affect my kidneys or my liver and the other stuff. So those are the type of
Well,
things.
those are the kinds of issues you normally run into with refined chemicals, as in so-called medicine, drugs that are approved by the FDA.
It helps me one way, but it's killing me the other.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I'm feeling better, and then you're dead.
Yeah, well,
Kidney failure,
that's true
liver
of some.
failure.
That's,
It's
that's
like
true. Many drugs, yeah.
So it's things to look into. So I'm excited to hear more about your research and things to come. So with that being said.
Okay, thank you for that. And so that was an interesting look at medical marijuana, and we may be revisiting this topic some more, looking into it a little deeper. You've been listening to A Path to Wellness on rhinoonair.com, WSPF-DB.com. And if you'd like to reach the practice, A Path to Wellness, it is reachable at 727-329-9637. I'll say that again, 727-329-9637. Or you can take a look online at APTW, short for A Path to Wellness.net. And we'll talk to you next time.